people, one that has cost trillions of dollars and millions of lives. It's been going on since the 1940s. If it were a scientific experiment, it would have been shut down by the ethics review panels generations ago.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. The hidden history of Big Brother in America, how the death of privacy and the rise of surveillance threaten us and our democracy, by Thom Hartmann. More information at all book outlets. Wild Alaskan Company, 100% sustainable wild-caught seafood delivered right to your door. More info at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. Cozy Earth, better sleep, better you. More info at cozyearth.com, promo code TOM. The latest views and opinions from U.S. politics and other fascinating subjects too, including cutting-edge science reports at hartmanreport.com. And Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at dinovite.com.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Hidden History of American Healthcare: Why Sickness Bankrupts You and Makes Others Insanely Rich, by me. I wrote this book. This is from the introduction, the title, How a Single-Payer Healthcare Systems Help Stop COVID-19. Healthcare systems can be national security systems. Just ask anyone from Taiwan. From January 20th, 2020, the United States, or on January 20, 2020, the United States recorded its first known case of COVID-19 infection. The following day, Taiwan got their first one too. By the end of April, over 1 million Americans were infected with the virus. But Taiwan had recorded only 388 infections, and their last case of local transmission was on April 12th. A few had arrived on aircraft from other countries. All were contained by quarantine. As of this writing in September 2020, there hadn't been a single new case or a single death in Taiwan since April. The economy never shut down, and as of this writing, was projected to have grown nearly 2% in 2020. Business, restaurants, theaters, and sports events were all open. Life was back to normal, albeit a mask-wearing normal. And it was made possible by their national single-payer healthcare system and their citizens' willingness to do their bit for the collective good. Back in the 1980s, Taiwan was on the edge of moving toward a democracy after a military coup in the 1960s. And about 40% of Taiwanese families did not have health insurance. If somebody in a family got sick, the cost of care often wiped out that family, and demands for reform were loud across the nation. Yue Reinhardt was a German-born healthcare economist married to a Taiwanese woman, and he attended a conference on healthcare in Taipei in 1989. His presentation impressed representatives of the government in attendance, and while he was still in town for the conference, they asked him for his best suggestion for a national healthcare system. He and his wife went back to their hotel and discussed the issue in depth, finally deciding that a single-payer national system would be the most cost-effective, efficient, and comprehensive program possible. He shared his thoughts with the government representatives, and the next day he left Taiwan to go back to Princeton, where he was an economic professor. 6 months later, though, a representative of Taiwan's government called him to say that they were going to take up his suggestion and asked him to help craft their healthcare program. He enthusiastically agreed, and by 1995, Taiwan had instituted one of the world's best single-payer healthcare systems. Today, everybody in Taiwan is fully covered for doctor and hospital services. Everybody has a driver's license-like healthcare card, which accesses their entire medical history. They can book a doctor's appointment on any computer terminal in the country, and the entire cost of the system is a bit more than 6% of Taiwan's GDP. For comparison, in the United States, healthcare consumes 24% of our GDP. because there is no insurance company intermediaries sucking profits off the system in Taiwan. When COVID-19 hit, Taiwan chose not to use the blunt force technique of shutting down their economy and locking people in. Instead, they took on the coronavirus with an aggressive nationwide test and contact trace program tied into the National Health Service database. Every infected person was identified and put into a comfortable quarantine, and every person he or she had come into contact with, even very marginal contacts, were also tested and their contacts traced. By April, just a bit more than 2 months after the first case surfaced, the country had the coronavirus isolated and completely under control. By quarantining inbound visitors to the nation island of 23 million, they were able, as of this writing, to keep it that way. Maintaining public health is one of the most important functions of any nation's healthcare system. Because America's is so fragmented, it's inconceivable that our nation could respond to an epidemic, a pandemic, or another public health disaster with the speed and elegance of Taiwan or any of the world's other nations with single-payer Medicare for all types of systems. It's like Stockholm Syndrome, a friend who's a psychotherapist said, describing the way that Americans have clung for more than 5 generations to a for-profit health insurance system, while the rest of the world figured out how to provide health care to all their citizens at a much lower price. People know it and have become familiar with it, she added. They just can't imagine anything else. It's probably the largest con job ever perpetrated on the American people, one that has cost trillions of dollars and millions of lives. It's been going on since the 1940s. If it were a scientific experiment, it would have been shut down by the ethics review panels generations ago. This experiment in providing health care via a for-profit insurance system has led to the deaths of more Americans than we lost in World War II. Every year, over 500,000 Americans go bankrupt, often losing everything they've worked their entire lives for because somebody in their family got sick. That's 500,000 families a year, every year, for the past few decades. And the coronavirus, of course, has only made things worse. Perhaps most galling, this massive ripoff is costing our entire nation and each of us individually a fortune. Insurance premiums right now make up 22% of all taxable payroll, well above what the cost of Medicare for all would be at around 14% when first put into place, dropping down to around 10% within a few years as previously uninsured people get their health needs up to date. As the health insurance, drug, and hospital parasites push their suckers deeper and deeper into our body politic, spending on health care by Americans went up 25% between 2000 and 2014. The book, The Hidden History of American Health Care by Thom Hartmann.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, it's the beginning of another week. Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. There's a lot going on we're going to get into in the program today. Number one, in this first hour, in just a few minutes, Democrats must demand that Justice Putin resign and his wife is prosecuted. Will the media amplify the voices of the Republicans who are saying, it's no big deal, trying to overthrow the government, let Thomas stay in the court? I'll tell you about how back in 1968-69, a very similar scenario played out. It's an amazing story. Stick around. Also, can Russia be de-Putinized in our first hour? Didn't Putin call for regime change in the United States? Mueller indicted, as I recall, a dozen or 14 Russian intelligence officers for dumping pro-Trump information into social media and collaborating with releasing hacked documents and hacking the DNC. I mean, Putin came out and said, well, he didn't say it, but he did it. He created a regime change in America. He brought us Donald Trump. Also, can Russia de-Putinize itself? We'll get into that also in our first hour. And our crazy alert in the first hour, Michael Flynn is claiming that Bill Gates and George Soros are planting under-the-skin tracking devices in you and me. Yeah, all for the New World Order, whatever that is. In our second hour, the zero-COVID approach. Is that the only way, or is that a good way? Could America reverse course and do a saves lives approach? I got to tell you about what's going on in Davis, California, the only city in America that is taking this plan. It's amazing, rather than going down the right-wing death cult route. Also, an extreme right-winger alert. The Bible thumper Christian nationalist running for the state Senate now wants to shoot godless commies in the face. That would be anybody who's not a member of his church, apparently. Right-wing hardcore Christian. Also, Terry Mills will be with us at the end of our second hour. Excuse me. She's with Nurses for America. They're talking to Congress about we need funding for COVID right now. This pandemic has not gone away, and there's a new variant coming, and it's going to hit the United States in the next few weeks. Also, in our third hour, Judd Legum is going to drop by about the 6 corporations that are right now funding the attack on women's reproductive rights. So there's an enormous amount of stuff to talk about. Also, just at the top of the news right now, Russian oligarch Roman Abramovich, he's an anti-Putin Russian oligarch who got together with a couple of Ukrainian negotiators to meet with Russians for peace talks earlier this month. Well, guess what? They showed up, they hung out with the Russians, they drank the tea, and now Abramovich and the other negotiators, including the Crimean Tatar lawmaker Rustem Umerov, are all showing symptoms of having been poisoned. Their skin is peeling off their hands, it's peeling off their faces, their eyes are red, it hurt, their tears hurt. Apparently the poison, they didn't get enough of the poison that it killed them, but they're not in good shape. Gee, what a shock, huh? Anyhow, let me start out with Clarence Thomas. This is an amazing story. It's the lead story over at HartmannReport.com this morning. It's titled "Democrats Must Demand Justice Thomas Resign and His Wife is Prosecuted." And my whole point is that this has happened before. And there's like this giant, it's fallen into a giant memory hole. Back in 1968, I remember these. They were called the Fortis Film Festivals. They were happening around the country. Yale University famously did one. I believe there was one at MSU. I didn't show up, so I can't say for certain, but I believe there was. This started in '68 when, in June of 1968, the Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, Earl Warren, the court was liberal at that time. It had a liberal majority. And the Chief Justice, Earl Warren, a liberal who had been appointed by Dwight Eisenhower, actually, Earl Warren decided that he was going to resign in June of '68 because the elections were in November of that year and the next president would come in January of '69, and he wanted to make sure that Lyndon Johnson would have a full 6 months to get a replacement for him on the court. So Congress then, the Senate, had to do 2 things. Number one, they had to move a new person into the Chief Justice position, and number 2, they had to find somebody to replace Earl Warren in what would not be the Chief Justice seat, but in that now empty seat. So the proposal that Lyndon Johnson made, that President Johnson made, was that Abe Fortas, the only Jewish member of the court, become the Chief Justice. And that a guy by the name of Homer Thornberry, who you've never heard of because he never made it to the court, would be the guy who would fill the empty seat. Well, Republicans, in particular the Nixon campaign, keep in mind, Richard Nixon at this time was campaigning for president. He was the Republican nominee. Republicans went nuts. And they started, they dug through all this stuff and found that Abe Fortas, Supreme Court Justice, had taken a $15,000 speaking fee for speaking to a university group. Now, this is, by the way, not uncommon. In fact, Clarence Thomas has taken a $15,000 speaking fee. But this was the basis of their attack. They just went nuts throughout 1968. And finally, toward the end of the year, Abe Fortas said, okay, screw it. It's not worth the effort. I don't want to be Chief Justice. And so LBJ said to Earl Warren, can you stay on the court for a while? And then when Nixon came in January the following year, he said, can you stay on the court for a while? And so Earl Warren stayed on the court until June of '69. But that's just the beginning of the story. This is where it gets really wild. So Fortas is not on the court. And by the way, Fortas didn't say, I'm not going to do this until September. The election was in November. Excuse me, in October. He backed away. And the election was in November. So, you know, Lyndon Johnson never got to put his own pick on the court. It was just, it was sort of like Merrick Garland. So when Nixon came in '69, there was an empty seat, and the Chief Justiceship was going to be empty when Earl Warren left. So when Nixon came in, what he did was he had John Mitchell, who had been his campaign manager and had been trashing Abe Fortas. He had John Mitchell launch a Justice Department investigation into Abe Fortas's wife. Because there had been allegations back when Fortas, when Johnson first, proposed Fortas for the Supreme Court Chief Justice position, there were allegations from right-wingers that there was a secret document in his wife's safe that showed that she was involved in tax evasion. Well, there was no such secret document. Nobody had ever produced a shred of proof about this. This was just a charge that was leveled by the Nixon campaign against Abe Fortas and against the Democrats. But the Attorney General of the United States, John Mitchell, had one of his top lawyers, a guy by the name of William Rehnquist, prepared to convene a grand jury to prosecute Abe Fortas's wife. And at that point, Fortas, looking at the possibility of spending years and hundreds of thousands of dollars defending himself and his wife, a grand jury, after all, can indict a ham sandwich, just said, screw it, I'm out of here, I'm going to resign from the Supreme Court. So Nixon now has 2 seats to replace, Fortas and Warren. So what I'm saying is, why don't Democrats do the same? Launch, have Merrick Garland launch an investigation into Ginny Thomas. It certainly appears that she engaged in seditious conspiracy. We're seeing these clips all over the place. Launch an investigation, the Justice Department and Congress launch an investigation into Ginny Thomas, just like they did back in '69, and start putting pressure on Clarence Thomas to resign from the Supreme Court. He has behaved, Ginny Thomas didn't, the other thing that Abe Fortas did is he took $20,000 as a honorarium, essentially a kind of a salary for being on the board of a nonprofit foundation. Well, Ginny Thomas has taken hundreds of thousands of dollars, perhaps over $1 million, from nonprofit foundations, like Heritage and groups like that. So it seems to me like what's good for the goose is good for the gander, and the Democrats should get all over this. Instead, they're calling for Thomas to just to recuse himself on issues having to do with January 6th. Come on. Can you spell weak-kneed? Come on. Prosecute or begin the investigation preparatory to prosecution of Ginny Thomas and go after Clarence. Get this guy off the court like they took Abe Fortas down.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's 16 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. Stick around. And welcome back. Les in Winnemucca, Nevada. Hey, Les, what's on your mind today?
Good morning. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
I was listening to your story, and I found it interesting because we're also in this place where we've got a guy that's the AG here that's acting like he's really William. His name's Barr. Is his real name, because he's not doing anything. There's a myriad of crimes out there. There's the Trump family, and the whole bunch of them are guilty of all kinds of different crimes, and it's just out in the public, just out there, right where you can look at it and say, okay, he did this, okay, he did that, okay, he did that. Why don't they choose something and start going after this guy instead of just...
This guy being Clarence Thomas, you mean?
Well, Thomas is right along with, his wife's made a lot. She worked for Koch Industries for years.
She hasn't worked for Koch Industries. She has worked for nonprofit, right-wing nonprofits that are funded and helped out, as it were, by by the Koch brothers over the years, but
but she worked for a
but she's taken hundreds of thousands of dollars. You know, Abe Fortas took $20,000 from a nonprofit, and for that he resigned from the U.S. Supreme Court. And
well, I get the point. What I'm trying to say here is, why doesn't the Attorney General do something?
Well, that's unfortunately the Attorney General doesn't have a question and answer session, so I don't know the answer to your question. I wish he would. I'll say that very much. I wish he would. I think that we've got it's looking like we've got a complete wimp in the Department of Justice, or the senior ranks of the Justice Department are still filled with leftover Trumpies.
Part of that I think is true, but the Democrats again look weak and ineffectual, and people go, "What? Why should I show up? What's the difference? They don't do anything anyway." Yeah. I've heard that from a lot of people.
Well, and this is one of my biggest concerns, Les, is that by letting Republicans get away with this stuff continuously, and the media just sleepwalking past this stuff, that it's just going to get worse and worse. Les, thanks for the call. This, on Meet the Press, for example, they spent 10 minutes talking about, President Biden saying that Putin shouldn't be in office. They spent 45 seconds discussing Ginny Thomas. Similarly, on Fox News, the word gas price was mentioned 580 times, Clarence Thomas 14 times. On CNN, gas was mentioned 1,170 times, and Clarence Thomas' story was mentioned only 100 times. On ABC's This Week Roundtable, they spent 10 minutes dissecting, this, by the way, from Eric Bollert's pressrun.media, dissecting Biden's Putin gaffe, or so-called gaffe. I agree with Joe Biden. And just 3 minutes acknowledging the Supreme Court's, destruction? I don't know. The Wall Street Journal has not yet run even one single front-page story about Clarence Thomas and Ginny Thomas. Not one. So you know where the priorities of the Murdoch family are. Okay, we'll be right back. It's 20 minutes past the hour. Who can de-Putinize Russia? Russians are having this conversation. Stick around. We'll be right back. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Remember Paul Manafort? He used to be business partners with Roger Stone back in the day, working for Republican politicians like, Nixon and Reagan. Well, in 2004, he took a really sweet gig over in Ukraine, helping the Russians, President Putin, install Viktor Yanukovych as the president of Ukraine, a nice Putin puppet. That same year, though, the people of Ukraine said enough, and basically Yanukovych got driven out of the country. So they tried it again in 2010. Let's bring, this Putin puppet back into Ukraine, Yanukovych. And it worked until 2014 when they got kicked out. So he gets kicked out of Ukraine, Manafort. So what does he do the next year, 2015? He decides to run the Trump campaign. Are you starting to see a pattern here? Yeah, could be. Okay, there's an entire video that outlines this whole timeline over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. Okay, so how does Russia get through this? Mikhail Shishkin is a Russian novelist. He's, like a big time. He's like kind of, like Stephen King in Russia. And he wrote a fascinating piece over at The Guardian, and raises some really important questions. He points out, first of all, that Russia has only flirted with democracy twice. In 1917, the first Russian democracy lasted literally a few months. And then in the 1990s, Russian democracy lasted a couple of years. He doesn't point this out. I do in my upcoming book, The Hidden History of Neoliberalism. Russian democracy was destroyed when George Herbert Walker Bush and Bill Clinton And Milton Friedman basically said to Russia, you will adopt neoliberalism. You're going to be our big experiment to prove that neoliberalism works. And of course, what it did was it produced an oligarchy, which is what neoliberalism always does. But anyhow, he goes on to say, he talks about how Hitler's Germany found its way out through a total crushing military defeat. But when Russia became a democracy in the early 1990s, he said there was no de-Stalinization of Russia. There was no Nuremberg trials for the Communist Party. And now he says Russia's fate depends on de-Putinization. And so how does he think this should be done? Well, he says, the German population was shown concentration camps in 1945. He said, similarly, Russians must be shown destroyed Ukrainian cities and the corpses of children. He said, we Russians must openly and courageously acknowledge our guilt and ask for forgiveness. He says, neither NATO nor Ukraine can de-Putinize Russia. We Russians must clean up our own country ourselves. And he asked, are we up to the task? In fact, he asked this question, and I'm assuming he's not asking it rhetorically. He says, do a dictatorship and a dictator give birth to a slave population? And obviously he's using the word in a different context than we would here in the United States. Or does a slave population give birth to a dictatorship and a dictator? The chicken and the egg. How can this vicious cycle be broken? How can a new Russia begin? He adds, can a democracy establish itself without a critical mass of citizens, without a mature civil society? I would argue probably not, but, again, I would say we screwed this up, or we helped screw this up. He said the world is calling for a Russian Nuremberg, but who in Russia will organize and carry out these legal proceedings? A long, painful rebirth, he summarizes, is the only way forward for Russia. I agree. And I think it's going to be very difficult. They're going to need a lot of help from us and the rest of the world. And meanwhile, we've got to clean up our act and deal with our own oligarchs here in the United States and try to restore democracy by number one, overturning Citizens United and the decisions that preceded it. So all that has happened. Crazy alert! This is insane. Michael Flynn, he was just on the X22 report. This is a podcast. And he says the executive chairman of the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab. Klaus Schwab wrote a book a couple of years ago about how technology is changing the world. It was a very plain vanilla book. But because of that, Michael Flynn says he, along with Microsoft founder Bill Gates and George Soros, that Jewish billionaire, are in it on this scheme. Michael Flynn claimed, these are very real and they're very dangerous people. These are people that see a global world order. He says, Klaus Schwab in his book, he says, it's the fourth industrial revolution. He said, these are real people. These are real things. They have an intent to have a new world order. By the way, I don't understand why Republicans are all hysterical about the phrase New World Order when it was George Herbert Walker Bush who used that phrase. And I think it was in a State of the Union address. I'm working from memory here, but, it was the late 80s, early 90s, and George Herbert Walker Bush, I'm pretty sure it might have even been his inaugural address that he said he was calling for a new world order. Anyhow, here's Michael Flynn. These are real people. These are real things. They have an intent to have a new world order. They have an intent to track every single one of us. They're going to put it under our skin. And they use a means by which it is under the skin. And that means is, oh yeah, vaccines. I forgot. They've got nanorobots in them that seize control of our brains. Didn't you know? That's why I'm talking like this today. I had the vaccine. In fact, I've had it 3 times. It must be the nanorobots speaking through me. Joe Biden is dictating my words, even now, via the nanorobots that have taken over. Come on, Michael Flynn. I don't know which is more astonishing, that a former general is promoting this kind of insanity or that as many as 20% of Americans believe him. Pick up your calls on the other side of the break.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Do you have friends, neighbors, acquaintances who are all hysterical about the New World Order and getting nanorobots under their skin with vaccines? I'd love to hear about it.
book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Homewreckers by Aaron Glantz, a Pulitzer Prize finalist. The subtitle is How a Gang of Wall Street Kingpins, Hedge Fund Magnates, Crooked Banks, and Venture Capitalists suckered millions out of their homes and demolished the American dream. It's quite a subtitle. This is from chapter 21, titled Triumph of the Homewreckers. Donald Trump took the oath of office on a chilly Friday morning, delivering an inaugural address that promised an end to the corruption and impotence that had widened America's historic wealth gap. He understood that his victory had been propelled by harnessing the public's rage and envy at having been left behind in the economic recovery, and that he promised that he would not forget it. Evoking FDR's famous Forgotten Man speech from 1932 that promised to prioritize the needs of, quote, the man at the bottom of the economic pyramid, Trump declared, quote, the forgotten men and women of our country will be forgotten no longer. Politicians had prospered, he said, but jobs had evaporated, factories closed. Quote, the establishment protected itself, but not the citizens of our country. Their victories have not been your victories. Their triumphs have not been your triumphs. And while they celebrated in our nation's capital, there was little chance to celebrate for struggling families all across our land. This all changes, starting right here and right now, Trump proclaimed, because this moment is your moment. It belongs to you. This is your day. This is your celebration. End of quote. The moment, however, belonged not to the great mass of struggling Americans, but to the new president's most ardent supporters, flamboyant businessmen who profited off the pain of the housing bust and were now poised to steer the ship of state for at least the next 4 years. As Trump reached out his hand and swore to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States of America, his close friend and inaugural committee chair, Tom Barack, stood behind him, smiling in a blue scarf and black overcoat. Afterward, Barack and Trump embraced at the U.S. Capitol's inaugural platform. The homewreckers had arrived. Barack didn't take an official position in the Trump administration, reportedly turning down an offer to be White House Chief of Staff, Treasury Secretary, or Ambassador to Mexico. Roger Stone told me he could have had any position he wanted, but working for the government would have meant making a lot less money. I don't think he has the belly for public service, Stone observed. Other homewreckers had no such qualms. If they changed the rules of the game now, they could make more money later. Steve Mnuchin, by now dubbed the foreclosure king by his critics, was confirmed as Treasury Secretary. His top deputy at One West, the bank, Joseph Otting, became the nation's chief bank regulator, the comptroller of the currency. Wilbur Ross, the bankruptcy tycoon who bought Florida's Bank United, became the Commerce Secretary, charged with everything from negotiating trade deals to overseeing the U.S. Census. Steve Schwarzman, the chairman of Blackstone, became chair of the White House's Strategic and Policy Forum, a group of business leaders who were to meet regularly with Trump. Jamie Dimon of J.P. Morgan Chase was named vice chair. Though the group disbanded over the summer after Trump's statement that bigotry and violence on many sides were responsible for a white nationalist's killing a counter-protester in Charlottesville, Virginia, Schwarzman, along with Barack, is said to be among a small group of outsiders, including Sean Hannity, who are put directly through to the president rather than being routed through the normal communications channels. Hannity reportedly chats with Trump nightly. Schwarzman has flown on Air Force One. On February 12, 2017, less than a month into Trump's presidency, while the commander-in-chief was dining with Prime Minister Shinzo Abe of Japan at his Mar-a-Lago golf club, Schwarzman threw a massive 70th birthday bash at his Four Winds estate, barely a mile and a half away. This time, neither Donald nor Melania Trump could make it, but daughter Ivanka and son-in-law Jared Kushner did, along with Mnuchin, Ross, and a who's who of high finance and culture, from Henry Kravis, co-founder of the hostile takeover firm Kohlberg Kravis Roberts, to the fashion designer Donatella Versace. The party featured live camels, trapeze artists, fireworks, and a gondolier. Schwarzman's tennis courts were covered with Asian-themed staging. The man who'd hired Patti LaBelle to sing Happy Birthday for his 60th was serenaded by Gwen Stefani on his 70th. After Happy Birthday, the peroxide pop star took a, quote, a quick twirl with the birthday boy around a dance floor constructed inside a two-story tent where acrobats shimmied and jumped, the New York Times reported. Unlike a decade before, when Schwarzman's glorious pre-bust bash sparked condemnation from sources as conservative as the Wall Street Journal. This time, the festivities sparked very little blowback. In her story, Bloomberg reporter Amanda Gordon reveled in the comparison with Schwartzman's 60th. There were some differences, though. She wrote, "Remember that beautiful fur coat on Melania Trump? It was New York in February on a weeknight. This time, no bundling required, with many folks golfing and swimming all day before a balmy night and fireworks alongside a full moon." Howard Marks, the co-chairman of Oak Tree Capital, a vulture firm that had bought and flipped 3,000 foreclosures, told Gordon, quote, "The world is an uncertain place. A lot of people are unhappy with a lot of other people. There are a lot of things that people are upset about. So it's nice to have an evening where everybody's happy, harmonious, and upbeat." End quote. There was a lot of celebrating to be had. In June, the gang got together for the marriage of Steve Mnuchin and his third wife, actress Louise Linton, almost 2 decades younger than him. And then it continues from there. The book is Homewreckers by Aaron Glantz. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Welcome back. So we looked it up during the break. It was 1990 when George Herbert Walker Bush, President George Herbert Walker Bush, Daddy Bush, said, announced a new world order. Indeed. Number one. And number two, I started my rant. I started talking about the Fortis film festivals, and then I kind of jumped topics, and I didn't close the loop on that. My apologies. Let me just tell you what the Fortis film festivals were. Abe Fortas, along with a majority of members of the Supreme Court in the I forget what year it was, 66, 67, in the mid-60s, voted to legalize pornography, at least mild pornography, in the United States. In this case, it was public, full frontal nudity, and as art. And so Strom Thurmond, this right-wing racist, he was a Southern Democrat, but he and the Republicans were all about this stuff. Strom Thurmond got a hold of the films that had been part of the lawsuit that led to the legalization of pornography, along with a bunch of other dirty movies, just any dirty movies that they could find. And he got a meeting room in the U.S. Capitol and turned it into a 24-hour a day, or I don't know if it was 24 hours a day, but for several hours every day for several days, for about a week actually. Strom Thurmond and his buddies, keep in mind that it was the entire United States Senate back then was white men. I don't know if this was before or after. It was Margaret Chase Smith was the first female senator. My memory on that is a little foggy, but in any case, it was all these old white men going in to watch dirty movies and coming out going, "Oh, we can't have this, and we got to get rid of that Abe Fortas because he voted for that." So that was the original Republican attack on Abe Fortas, was that he voted for dirty movies. And when that didn't stick enough, then they shifted to, "Oh, and he's corrupt. He took $15,000 as a speaking fee." And that was all of 1968, and that was enough to get him to no longer try to be Chief Justice. Then the following year, when Nixon became president and John Mitchell, his campaign manager, became Attorney General, then they said, let's take Fortas off the court altogether. The most liberal member, the only Jewish member of the court. Let's get rid of him altogether. And so that was when John Mitchell started, said he was going to impanel. He was going to have William Rehnquist, his right-hand lawyer, who later became Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. Right-wing Chief Justices, by the way, appointed by Richard Nixon, were on the Supreme Court for 32 years. As a consequence of this event, or in large part as a consequence of it. I realize several of the people that Nixon appointed were not, didn't turn out to be the conservatives he hoped. But he got his, he got Lewis Powell on the court and all that kind of stuff. So this is how it played out. This is what it's all about. Anyhow, let me pick up your phone calls here. Dan in Omaha, Nebraska. Hey, Dan, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, excuse me. I wanted to kind of give you an Omaha report on Ginny Thomas.
Okay. Go for it.
on Sunday there was a big spread about her participation and everything. And this morning when I picked up the paper, there's absolutely nothing there.
Is that the
Omaha
Tulsa
World
World?
Herald
The Omaha...
describes its...
I'm sorry, go ahead.
The Omaha World Herald describes itself as a conservative newspaper, which means that for the rest of us, we don't get any news, just what they want us to hear.
Right.
And this state has been plagued with all of this misdirection since, let's say Rush Limbaugh.
Yeah.
And we have to deal with that because those people make this city live as if it was a small town. And I just want to let you know that they're busily repressing anything here like they usually have done in my 78 years. And it's disgusting. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, I get it. Dan, thanks a lot for the call. Ken in Red Bluff, California says you disagree with me, so you go to the front of the line. Ken, what's up?
Well, I was thinking that maybe Biden's statement about Putin needing to be taken out of power might not have been a mistake that the White House was walking back, since if you think about it, his advisors and cabinet are pretty much the same ones that were on Obama's.
Yeah.
And they were pushed for regime change in Syria, the regime change in Ukraine.
In Libya.
That's how we kind of ended up there after Clinton pulled the nukes in '94 and promised we would protect Ukraine.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking that his advisor, maybe that's what they're thinking.Maybe they're going to go for, I
think you may be right, Ken.
Regime changes.
Yeah, Jennifer Rubin has an op-ed in the Washington Post today. A longtime Republican, very conservative columnist for the Washington Post. And what she's saying is that Biden was right, and his advisors, who rushed out within minutes of his having said it to say, oh, no, he's not talking about regime change, they're wrong. And if that's what you're saying, Ken, that's what I'm saying, and I'm agreeing with you. We're not disagreeing. Just, FYI. But
well, they have a history of it, his advisors, which were the same ones that advised Obama on him.
I totally get it. I totally get it. I think it's time to take names and kick ass here. Ken, thank you for the call. Paul in Woodinville, and no fair saying you disagree with me just to get to the front of the line. Paul in Woodinville, Washington. Hey, Paul, what's up?
Well, I do disagree with it here, and I'm not in the front of the line. But
no, I was talking about the last caller. When I put him on, I said you disagree with me, so you're going to the front of the line. So I jumped him ahead of you. I'm sorry. So what's up, Paul?
That's okay. That's okay. Because what you were saying, your rant on the Fortis Film Festival, this kind of plays into what I was saying. By the way, the Supreme Court did not vote to legalize pornography. They actually voted that the First Amendment protects some types of nudity as free speech.
Correct.
In Jacobellis versus Ohio, in which Potter Stewart said, I know pornography when I see it, and this isn't pornography. They allowed the state to outlaw pornography, but not to outlaw free speech. That was the community standard decision. And what my grievance is about the Supreme Court is not so much about Clarence Thomas, but I'll put it this way. I think it's time we declare that a black woman does have the luxury to speak up to Southern white men and, frankly, Southern white women who are distorting her record and distorting the facts of her hearings. So
you think she should have? You think Judge Jackson should have gone all beer bong Brett?
Didn't have to go beer bong Brett, but if we're talking about Clarence Thomas, he was the first beer bong Brett. He was he was obnoxious and offensive in his hearings because he was being accused of essentially the same thing that Brett Kavanaugh was.
Right, and he called it a high-tech lynching.
Why a black man can stand up for himself, and a drunken white man can stand up for himself, but a qualified black woman can't. By the way, the Republicans. Who is it? It's people on the left who keep saying that she doesn't have the luxury to stand up for herself. I don't hear anybody on the right saying that. I hear Lindsey Graham saying, I'm not going to vote for her because she's soft on crime. And same with Ted Cruz. You know what's ridiculous about that? Because she couldn't stand up for herself, is that makes no sense, because as a federal judge, the federal bench doesn't deal with criminal statutes.
Right.
The federal bench, that's state courts. The federal bench, the federal government has no constitutional authority to pass general criminal statutes. The only review of criminal statutes a federal judge would have would be to evaluate the constitutionality of state criminal statutes or the criminal statutes that the federal government does have the authority to pass are those that subvert the Constitution or are somehow an attack on the federal government.
I get it. Now, here's my complaint, Paul. Last night on TV, one of our Democratic senators, and I'm not going to name her because I don't want this interpreted as I'm trash talking her, because I'm not. At least she spoke up. But one of our Democratic senators came out and said, you know, it's really important that Clarence Thomas recuse himself from anything having to do with January 6th. And I'm like, well, duh. But, you know, why not instead? I mean, you know, if this is a negotiation, you start with the most extreme position you can. It should be the Justice Department needs to investigate Ginny Thomas with an eye to possible prosecution, and they need to convene a grand jury, just like John Mitchell threatened to do with Abe Fortas's wife back in 1969. And Clarence Thomas, the Supreme Court Justice, Associate Justice, needs to resign. I mean, why are Democrats not calling for those two simple things? And then if they want, settle for he'll recuse himself. Because right now what they're getting is they're calling for a recusal, and they're going to settle for absolutely nothing.
Right. Okay, so to finish my point is that if Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson were soft on crime, for instance, give me an example. January 6th, those were the kinds of federal crimes we're talking about. So if she were soft on crime as a federal judge, that would mean that she's erring on the side of restraining the federal government's power to be a tyrannical prosecutional power. And that's exactly what the right wing keeps calling for. Yeah. And so,
no, I get it, Paul. Your arguments are brilliant, and but you know the hearings are over. But Justice Thomas is still on the bench. Paul, thank you for the call. Tyrone in Harlem, New York. Hey, Tyrone, what's on your mind today?
Hey, how you doing? Thanks for taking my call, Tom. Sure. The Republicans are going to complain either way we go it. And when they call us bleeding heart liberals, that is mainly because we won't go to the bottom of the barrel with them and act as foolish and as reckless as they have acted. But because we won't do that, we're not willing to break eggs to make an omelet. We're not willing to do what's necessary to put these people in their – we won't never put them in their place, but we got to let them know they can't walk over us. Yeah. And that's what they have been doing. And they use our discomfort, our response to them negatively, and they use it against us. Let's say if Judge Brown became irritated and aggravated and said something to them. Oh, look, she has no control over herself. She's an angry. But either way, these people are going to say whatever the situation is, they're going to try to turn it. They're going to turn it against us any way you slice it. We need to say, listen, this is what they're going to do. Like the situation with Joe Biden saying that regime change. He took it back, but the media is pushing the narrative that he was going for regime change. This is what he's going for, regime change. He's never said nothing about regime change, but because the media sounds better with the media and they don't realize what they're doing is they're like schoolyard instigators. They're trying to start a fight.
Oh, they realize it, Tyrone.
Yes.
They realize it.
Yes.
I mean, we've got a media that is well-stocked with Republicans. It is well-stocked, and it's owned by people who are entirely Republicans. And, Ted Turner is long gone. The last Democrat who owned a major media operation. Tyrone, I got to run, but thank you for the call. Spot on. It seems like Republicans are motivated by anger and fear, and Democrats are trying to bring the country together. Well, sometimes you've got to, like he said, break some eggs to make an omelet.
Listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
47 minutes past the hour. Back with your calls right after this. And welcome back. Let's see here. Malcolm in Bluebell, Pennsylvania. Hey, Malcolm, thanks for listening to the Thom Hartmann app. Very cool. What's up?
Good day, Tom. I'm just here to talk about the justice system. It has been broken, and we have two systems. One that prosecutes essentially the bottom 99%, and then there's another one that kind of gives slaps on the wrist to the 1%.
Yep.
Steve Bannon, he was arrested for not testifying on the January 6th committee, and he wasn't in jail long enough to finish a cup of coffee. And all that did was bolster his celebrity.
Actually, he was arrested for stealing over $1 million from people who gave it to him to build a wall on the southern border.
Was that where he got his pardon from?
Yes, that's what he was arrested for. The January 6th stuff, that referral to the Justice Department was in January, that the January 6th committee in January of this year, 3 months ago, 4 months ago, what month is this? This is March, yeah, 3 months ago. The January 6th committee referred a criminal referral to the Justice Department to Steve Bannon, and we still have yet to hear from the Justice Department.
And we're still waiting.
Yeah.
Right. And secondly, with Clarence Thomas, if this were Ketanji Brown Jackson's husband, he would have been indicted probably last week.
Yep.
And she would be either asked to resign and possibly they would have an investigation as to what she knew and when she knew it.
Yep.
And
or Sonia Sotomayor.
Probably yesterday.
Yep.
Exactly. And so once again, it ties back into it favoring most likely who's in charge and who has enough power.
Yeah.
And even for Biden to say that we should get rid of Putin, if Trump said it, there would be zero apologies for it.
No, of course not. Of course not. I mean, Trump was like, with Kim Jong-un, I'll do nuclear war with you. Yes, I'm happy to. And everybody's like, oh, yeah, that's just Trump. You're absolutely right. Malcolm, thank you very much. Jerry in Huntington Beach, California. Hey, Jerry, thanks for listening to KPFK. What's up?
Well, first I want to say I want to apologize for yelling at you last time you were kind enough to let me on your show.
I don't recall. I'm sorry.
Well, I was incensed about, I've been incensed about this Ukraine invasion since it happened, and I was a little beside myself.
Okay.
But anyway, I just want to, real quick, I just want to say that I don't think it's going to turn out well for Ukraine. I think there's going to be a lot more death and destruction before it's over, unfortunately.
I agree. I think, what Putin's trying to do is establish a land bridge between Russia and Crimea. And, he'd like to go all the way over to the far southwestern border there. He wants, he wants access to an ice-free, year-round access to the Mediterranean.
Yes, he does. But the problem is, I don't know if I trust the conventional stupidity that we're engaged in right now about all these sanctions and everything else about Ukraine, because you're pushing this guy into a corner. He's already unstable. And people are talking about him launching 1 or 2 weapons. That's all I hear about, 1 or 2. What if he launches all 5,000 or 6,000 that he has at once? Then what do we do?
Well, he's not going to do that. What we would do is...
How do you know he's not going to do that?
Because he's not suicidal. He's not an idiot. I mean, it's remotely conceivable that if people within... See, I mean, just like in the United States, if the president orders a nuclear strike, there's a whole chain of command it has to go through. That's true of Russia as well.
Yes.
I really don't think that...
Do we have that? Do they have that? I don't know.
Yes, they do. I can tell you, they definitely do. And
so we're just hoping that they don't follow the orders to launch the weapons if he gives the orders.
You got it, Jerry. You got it. Thanks a lot for the call. We'll be right back. Hey, I've got a new book out. It's called The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, How the Death of Privacy and the Rise of Surveillance Threaten Us and Our Democracy. Available wherever you find fine books. You know, they often say that Republican Senator from Wisconsin, Ron Johnson, is the stupidest guy in the entire United States Senate. I get it. Tommy Tuberville gives him a run for his money, but he just came out with what has to be at least the very stupidest idea of the year. Ron Johnson is proposing, there's a shortage of child care workers right now in America. There's a whole bunch of good reasons for that. But he has proposed a solution. His suggestion, any woman in America who's getting any kind of public assistance, you're getting food stamps, you're getting, tuition relief, whatever it may be, you would be forced to go into daycare centers and care for children. Yeah, seriously. This is Ron Johnson's idea. People who had no training, and one of his assistants said, well, it's just like teachers who teach in public schools where their own kids attend. No, it's not. These are not trained professionals. There's no union. This is nuts. There's a whole video about it over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Whew. Welcome back. Those long reads at the end are wild. Okay, picking up your phone calls. Dave in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Hey, not too much, Tom. On this topic of de-Putinizing Russia,
right.
I want to, I guess I want to disagree with, well, I don't know where you stand on it, but you are telling the truth, and I don't know if anyone's listening, but the reality is all right, we have a problem in the United States. We have 70 million people that prefer what the Commonwealth of Independent States is. 70 million Trump voters, they prefer it because what Russia seriously is a confederacy, what we call a confederacy, okay? It's a loose alignment of countries. Some of them don't even speak the same language. Like one of the big problems is when we attempted to Romanize the written language of Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan, Russia considers a core component. It would be like in the old Confederacy, Virginia or something. Okay, and the reality is all these confederacies, they end up being a pyramid scheme. All right, we may not like it. You may find it distasteful because we started as a confederacy, but it is true. They end up being a pyramid scheme, and only those.
So you're saying that because Russia is not a republic, it can't become a democracy?
No, what I'm saying is, all right, Russia became a confederacy, similar to America. But when Russia became a confederacy, we were a bipolar world. Okay, what's his name? Primakov. He's dead now. Primakov died, and he wrote a big book on how Russia cannot exist in a unipolar world dominated by America. Right. But without getting into all that, Tom, okay.
Well, I think we're going back to a bipolar world. I think it's going to be an alignment of Russia and China, and I think Russia is going to be the client state to China, and you know, ultimately it's going to be them against the West. It's going to be the oligarchies, and well, I think you could probably describe China as an oligarchy too. It's going to be the oligarchies against the democracies. And the big question is, will America, you know, I mean, Putin tried to turn America into an oligarchy by putting Trump into office. And Trump brought a bunch of oligarchs with him, put billionaires in his cabinet, you know, passed oligarch-friendly rules, you know, cut taxes, cut regulation, gutted the EPA. He did everything he could to help the oligarchs. And I think that, you know, that's the bottom line. And you know, we'll see where that all goes. Dave, thanks for the call. Alejandro in Miami. Hey, Alejandro, what's up?
Hey, Tom, I totally agree with you that the Democrats have to go full throttle for impeachment proceedings because, you know, like as an attorney, obviously I think that Clarence Thomas is in woeful violation.
You know who's calling for this is Ilhan Omar. She's the only person in Congress who's calling for impeachment hearings against Clarence Thomas, which astonishes me. Just one? Really?
Exactly. And I think it shows the Democratic Party's cowardness. Or somehow they think that Supreme Court justices are not able to be impeached. But this is why, you know, I just found this article on MSNBC, this op-ed, and they're reminding us of this case of Samuel Chase, who was impeached from the, you know, who was impeached.
He was not removed from office, though.
Right, he was not, right.
What year was that, by the way? That was the late 1700s, early 1800s?
Yeah, let's say early 1800s, around when Thomas Jefferson was president, right?
Yeah, okay.
And that's because they saw him as obviously very political, like he was too unfair to be, you know, to rule on decisions, right? He was too partisan.
Well, and he was. I mean, Chase was an outspoken partisan.
Right, exactly. And so, and what the point of this op-ed is to say is that if they were willing to impeach him on that, the Democrats have a stronger case to impeach him on this because obviously he violated judicial canon of conflict of interest.
Right.
And the fact that he could be criminally involved in this investigation if the text messages reveal that he advised his wife on how to overturn the election.
Yeah, I'm with you. I would like to hear some under oath testimony from Mr. Thomas about whether he coordinated with his wife to overthrow the government. He was the only vote on the Supreme Court to hide Trump's documents. The only vote. Alejandro, thank you.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. The hidden history of Big Brother in America, how the death of privacy and the rise of surveillance threaten us and our democracy, by Thom Hartmann. More information at all book outlets. Wild Alaskan Company, 100% sustainable wild-caught seafood delivered right to your door. More info at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. Cozy Earth, better sleep, better you. More info at cozyearth.com, promo code TOM. The latest views and opinions from U.S. politics and other fascinating subjects too, including cutting-edge science reports at hartmanreport.com. And Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at dinovite.com.
We say fight back!
Our book today is The Poisoned City, Flint's Water and the American Urban Tragedy by Anna Clark. This is from the prologue. On a hot day in the summer of 2014 in the Civic Park neighborhood where Pastor R. Sherman McCathern preached in Flint, Michigan, water rushed out of a couple of fire hydrants. Puddles formed on the dry grass and splashed the skin of the delighted kids who ran through it. But the spray looked strange. The water was coming out dark as coffee for hours, McCathern remembered. The shock of it caught in his throat. Something is wrong here. Something had been wrong for months. That spring, Flint, under the direction of state officials, turned off the darkening water that it had relied on for the drinking water that it had relied on for nearly 50 years. The city planned to join a new regional system called the Carignondi Water Authority, and while it waited for the KWA to be built, it began bringing in its water from the Flint River. McCathern didn't pay much attention to the politicking around all this. He had enough to worry about with his busy parish. But after the switch, many of his neighbors grew alarmed at the water that flowed from their kitchen faucets and shower heads. They packed public meetings, wrote questioning letters, and protested at City Hall. They filled clear plastic bottles in their taps to show how the water looked brown or orange and sometimes had particulates floating in it. Showering seemed to be connected with skin rashes and hair loss. The water smelled foul. A sip of it put the taste of a cold metal coin on your tongue. But the authorities said everything was all right and you could drink it, so people did, McCathern said later. Residents were advised to run their faucets for a few minutes before using the water to get a clean flow. But as the months went by, the city plant tinkered with treatment and issued a few boil water advisories. State environmental officials said again and again that there was nothing to worry about. The water was just fine. Whatever their senses told them, whatever the whispers around town, whatever Flint's troubled history with powerful institutions telling them what was best for them, this wasn't actually hard for people like McCathern to believe. Public water systems are one of this country's most heroic accomplishments, a feat so successful that it's almost invisible. By making it a commonplace for clean water to be delivered to homes, businesses, and schools, we have saved untold lives from what today sound like antiquated diseases in a Charles Dickens novel: cholera, dysentery, typhoid fever. Here in Flint, it was instrumental in turning General Motors, founded in 1908 in Vehicle City, as the town was known, into a global economic giant. The advancing underground network of pipes defined the growing city and its metropolitan region, which boasted of being home to one of the strongest middle classes in the entire United States. McCathern is a tall, bald man with a thin mustache and a scratchy rasp in his baritone voice. At the time of the water switch, he had led the non-denominational Joy Tabernacle Church for about 15 years. It was founded in the YMCA in downtown Flint, where it held baptisms in the swimming pool. But in 2009, it made a home in Civic Park, where a Presbyterian church closed after 85 years and gave its sanctuary over to the young and hopeful congregation. By then, Civic Park, one of America's oldest subdivisions, was a desert of deserted, historically significant homes, the pastor said. Built between 1917 and 1919 by General Motors and DuPont and Company, along curving tree-lined boulevards, the tidy houses were designed for Flint's auto workers and their families. But over the years, the neighborhood was blighted by vacancy. Empty 2 stories with lurching front porches and crumbling roofs sat alongside crisply painted homes where Flint residents, they sometimes call themselves Flintoids or Flintstones, still live their lives. When the sound of gunshots on the street outside interrupted services, McCathern gave a nod to the church musicians, urging them to play louder. Some called Joy Tabernacle a thug church, he said, but McCathern saw the good. The young men filling his pews built a proud society, if not by getting their names on the honor roll, then by tagging their names with spray paint. In the end, people just want to be seen. The ghosts of the past went well beyond Civic Park. Between General Motors and the United Auto Workers, the city had been a flourishing hub for American innovation. There were more than 100 different manufacturing establishments in town. 10 of them employed at least 1,000 people each. And they not only made automobiles, but paints, varnishes, tools, dyes, cotton, textiles, and a wealth of other products. Flint had one of the highest per capita incomes in the entire nation. And despite being severely segregated, it was a magnet for African-American migrants from the South. When Vice President Hubert Humphrey stopped by during the campaign for the 1964 presidential election, he praised Flint for, quote, zooming ahead with unbelievable growth and progress. Workers earned wages that are very good, Humphrey said, and, quote, because of the great labor management program in the community over many years, there has been a constant rise in the standard of living, end quote. Away from the assembly lines and the executive suites, the people of Flint felt that the city just shouldn't be a place to work. It should also be a place to thrive. Charles Stewart Mott, an auto pioneer who became GM's single largest stockholder and 3-term mayor, created a nationally renowned community schools program that provided education, skills building workshops, and social influence and social services. The book, The Poison City.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. So, breaking news, a federal judge has just ruled that Donald Trump, well, let me put it in context. John Eastman, who was the guy who was advising Donald Trump's legal strategy to have Vice President Pence refuse to accept electors from states, from the swing states that Trump lost, and instead accept the phony electors, right? He was the guy behind this whole thing with the phony electoral votes. He was using the email account of his university. And so the January 6th committee subpoenaed the university and said, we want to see those emails between Eastman and Trump, or Eastman and Trump's people, and see what the deal was. It was between Eastman and Trump, but Trump doesn't have email, but you get, mob bosses never do, right? Mob bosses always do everything through their subordinates. But in any case, so this federal judge, his name is David Carter, he's in Los Angeles, U.S. District Court. He just ruled, he said, based on the evidence, the court finds it more likely than not that President Trump corruptly attempted to obstruct the joint session of Congress on January 6, 2021. He goes on to say, our nation was founded on the peaceful transition of power epitomized by George Washington laying down his sword to make way for democratic elections. It was a 44-page ruling. He said, ignoring this history, President Trump vigorously campaigned for the vice president to single-handedly determine the results of the 2022 election. With a plan this bold, President Trump knowingly tried to subvert this fundamental principle. And then he takes this argument that Eastman was making that the Electoral Count Act of 1787 or 89 was unconstitutional. He says believing the Electoral Count Act was unconstitutional does not give President Trump a license to violate it. Disagreeing with the law entitles Trump to seek a remedy in court, not to disrupt a constitutionally mandated process. And President Trump knew how to pursue election claims in court. After filing and losing more than 60 suits, this plan was a last-ditch attempt to secure the presidency by any means. This is not changing the world in any huge way. It is going to give the committee some documents. But it's also a big deal in that this is a federal judge. This will raise the pressure on Merrick Garland to do something. We so far have no evidence whatsoever that the Justice Department is investigating Donald Trump. And typically when there is an investigation, you have all kinds of evidence because you have people coming out of grand jury rooms going, holy cow, or I'm angry, or whatever. None of that happening. It looks like, Garland's just doing whatever Garland does. I don't know, bowling? But anyhow. But I wanted to talk about also what's happening in Davis, California, and the zero COVID approach. Laura Spinney wrote a great piece over at The Guardian. It's titled The Zero COVID Approach Got Bad Press, but it worked, and it could work again. And basically what she's talking about, there were countries, China is the most prominent, and of course they're being bit in the backside in some ways by this right now, that tried to prevent COVID altogether by having lockdowns and mask mandates and regular testing and all that kind of thing. And it largely worked until Omicron came along. And now Omicron has punched through the holes in that, particularly in Hong Kong, and China has a bit of a problem. But what she's pointing out is that for a time, you can limit the spread of a disease and it's potentially controllable. And then it hits a point where you just can't control it. It's out of control. And that's obviously what happened here in the United States. That's not what happened in China. They did control it. Now, they should have used that time to get everybody vaccinated, but at least in Hong Kong, you've got large chunks of the population who are not vaccinated, and thus it's kind of melting down. But she points out, Laura Spinney in her article points out what's going on in Davis, California. This is absolutely fascinating. Davis, California is a college town. 77,000 people live in town, and then you've got the college campus as well. That's around 15,000 people living on campus. And the college got together with the town, and this was funded by the college initially, although the town later got, COVID funds and pandemic funds and whatnot to do this, and has just, made the town basically COVID-free. They start out with this, she starts out with this story. Once a week, Lori Janich drives down the street from her office and partakes in an ongoing success story. Phone in hand to confirm her appointment, she strolls into the large activities and recreation center on the campus at UC Davis, reaches a COVID-19 testing station, swirls water in her mouth, spits into a tube, and leaves. Within a day, she receives her test result. And then this is an article over at the Sacramento Bee, sacb.com, by Mark Kreidler. He notes, the same goes, he says, everything about the COVID-19 testing process is free. The same goes for all UC Davis students, faculty members, and staffers, Davis City residents, local workers, and visitors, anyone whose life brings them into the town. And points out this experiment, basically putting the university and its adjoining city into a health bubble, has delivered incredible results. Free saliva-based testing. You don't have to stick anything up your nose. You just spit into a tube. Free vaccinations, free masks, and the city pays for isolation or quarantine housing if you test positive. The city is also regularly testing their city wastewater, and they're routinely screening children in the local school, again using spit tests. Plus, UC Davis has put together a 200-person, essentially, army. They call them health ambassadors, and they hired a local PR firm to get the message out. In this article, they note that you can't walk a block in the city without seeing signs about the importance of doing this, of keeping COVID down. Right now, I mean, this article was published on March 7th. It was 2 weeks ago. Davis's cumulative COVID-19 infection rate, he notes, is roughly half the statewide average. In January 2020, when California was experiencing a 17% test positivity rate, Davis's weekly average came in just above 1%. This past January, 3 months ago, two and a half months ago, as Omicron pushed state positivity rates above 20%, Davis's weekly average never got above 5%. So what Laura Spinney is proposing over at The Guardian, and it's a great piece. There's just a hot link in it into the story about Davis, but that's, I think, really the big story, is basically what New Zealand did, and China and some of these other countries. And her point is, if you combine these kinds of mitigation strategies with an aggressive vaccination strategy, between the two, you end up with a COVID-free environment. And that's like a good thing. That's a desirable thing. I mean, given that there was a piece about this in the New York Times last I think it was Friday, maybe it was Saturday. In fact, it must have been Saturday because I didn't talk about it on the air, and I copied it to my family, I recall. About how about a third of people who get symptomatic COVID end up with long COVID. Between 10 and 30%. I'm using the high end of the range, but that's what they said, between 10 and 30% as far as they can tell. Right now, people who get symptomatic COVID, it becomes long COVID. And about a third of those people, for their symptoms of long COVID, they're experiencing extreme fatigue and or dementia, brain fog. And in fact, there was a piece in the New York Times on Sunday about how the brain fog of COVID appears to be using the same mechanism, the same basically brain damage that people get called chemo brain. When people go on chemotherapy, they end up with brain fog as well. So if you've got, half of people who get COVID are symptomatic, and of those who are symptomatic, a third of them get long COVID, so that's now a sixth of the people who got COVID. And of the people who are symptomatic and get long COVID, a third of them, what's a sixth of a third of a sixth? That would be 2%, right? No, it would be, man, I just can't do math that fast. It would be 1/3 of a sixth of them. I'm lousy with math in my head. My apology. I remember numbers well, like dates and things, but I can't do math in my head. So anyway, it's just like, why do this? Why have this? Why experience this if if there are options, if it's possible to get out of it? So, is your town doing anything about this? Is your state doing anything about this? Increasingly in the United States, we're just saying, hey, let 1,000 flowers bloom. And what that's going to mean is that particularly in states or in counties in states that have very low vaccination rates, we're going to see probably another big spike in hospitalizations and illness coming down the road in another month or so, just as the COVID funds have been cut off.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program,
which we'll be talking about in more detail in the next hour, so stick around for that. It's 16 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Sean says 1/3 of 1/6 is 0.0555. Is that 5%? I don't know. Anyway, you need to convert it all into, from fractions into decimals, into percentages, and then I can do that math. But anyhow, picking up your calls, Paul in Lucerne, California. Hey, Paul, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Well, I was going to talk about Russians not launching nuclear weapons. They had two, a general and a lieutenant colonel. Everybody thinks they got in trouble. No, neither one of them got in trouble. I just fact-checked that when I was waiting on the phone. One of them is considered a hero. Both of them got awards for bravery and Red Stars.
These are instances that happened back in the last century when they got false readings that incoming missiles. Go ahead.
Yes. One happened in 83, a false alert. And then one happened, they made a movie about the first one, the Crimson Tide. They got an order to launch during the Cuban Missile Crisis. they got an order to rescind the launch, but they didn't get the authentication code for the rescind order. So they have a 3-person authentication thing. 3 people have to agree. The political officer said no. And thank God, because he had the most clout on the boat, even though he wasn't the captain, but he was the political officer. So he could have your whole family arrested.
Yeah.
And he threatened families. He threatened to do that. And he really had to do some serious threatening. And there's some evidence that he might have shot a couple people. The story's kind of iffy, you know. But he didn't get in no trouble. He was returned.
So there have been two times where in Russia there was theoretically or actually an order to nuke the United States, and both times people down the chain of command stood down.
Yeah. And then about long COVID, my grandson caught coronavirus very early on, and his sense of smell is just now coming back. This was a year ago.
How old is he?
He's 10.
Oh, jeez.
He got it when he was now.
So
and he's just now getting his taste and his sense of smell back. And the doctor thinks it won't completely recover, but it will recover.
Right. Oh, that's.
And he didn't have a bad case.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the, you know, it's not 1/3 of people who are hospitalized. It's 1/3 of people who had symptomatic COVID. And 1/3 of the people who coughed or had a sore throat end up with long COVID. I mean, that's just mind-boggling to me. It's Amy Vanderpool writes about it in her Shiro newsletter, which is...
It's no joke.
Yeah, no, it's not. And it's the reason why...
We still wear our mask.
Go ahead.
We still wear our mask, and we're not going to take our mask off.
Yeah, same here.
As a family that this is it. This is our new life.
Yeah, same here. I mean, Louise had to go into it's a whole long story, a family event this weekend, and we had to walk into a restaurant to pick up some carry-out food. And, she put on a mask, even though, hey, it's Oregon. We've ended our mask mandate a couple weeks ago, and nobody's wearing masks. Well, I shouldn't say nobody's wearing masks. Probably 1/3 of the people that we saw were wearing masks, but it's like people are saying...
That's what it is here. About a half to a third are wearing masks still around my house.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's important. I think, if you can avoid getting this disease, it's a good idea. Paul, thank you very much for the call. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of the news of the day. I've got an extreme right-wing alert for you, actually 2 of them. Marjorie Taylor Greene and a wild Bible thumper. We'll pick up your phone calls, and then in about a half hour from now, Terry Mills is going to come on about the funding for COVID. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. So did you hear the story about the 3 white guys, 20, 22, 24 years old, who just pleaded guilty to trying to attack power grids in 3 different parts of the United States? According to the Justice Department, their scheme was that they were going to bring down electricity for 3 basically major cities or major regions of the United States. And the theory of this program is sort of like what Tim McVeigh was all about back in 1990, I think it was 3, when he blew up the federal building. Their scheme was that doing so, cutting off the power to these cities. Well, this is from the Department of Justice. Quote, the defendants believed their plan would cost the government millions of dollars and cause unrest for Americans in the region. They had conversations about how the possibility of the power being out for months would cause a race war and induce the next Great Depression. It's suicide pills and everything. Why aren't we talking about white terrorism in America? There's a video about this over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. Oh, my. So, extreme right-wing alert. Where'd it go? Oh, here it is, right here. Sorry about that. I've got a crazy alert here for you. Just took me a moment to find it. Crazy alert. Last September, MAGA minister Jackson Lahmeyer, this guy is a mega church pastor, a church pastor, and last year he challenged Jim Langford in the Republican primary. Jim Langford is Oklahoma's Republican senator. He lost. But he said that during that campaign, he said that he wanted to see the establishment of military tribunals to send godless commies to burn forever in a lake of fire. This was his campaign slogan, I guess. He repeatedly declared, speaking of liberals or people who don't share his right-wing Christian nationalist worldview, that America should become exclusively a Christian country, that he wants to, quote, shoot them in the face. This guy is preaching Jesus. For those of you who ever read the Bible, there's something weird here. But anyhow, now he's running for the Oklahoma State Senate. And in a campaign ad, he declared, we are at war with communists, and he's asking the voters to unleash me. He said, this war is designed to not look like a war. They're coming for our kids. They've hostage the government. They've destroyed the economy. Jesus Christ is the only way to salvation. I also think it's the only way we overcome. I think it's the way that we win. This guy literally wants to establish a theocratic state in Oklahoma. Crazy alert number one. Crazy alert number two. This is equally disgusting. Marjorie Taylor Greene last week gave a speech in which she said, she was talking about Pete Buttigieg, right? Pete and his husband Chastain have adopted a couple of kids, and in this attack, I don't even know how to describe this. Well, I do know how to describe it. She said that he can, quote, take his electric vehicles and his bicycles, and he and his husband can stay out of our girls' bathrooms, end quote. Now, why would she say that? Neither of these men are trans. Neither of them are, well, she would say it because what she's doing is perpetuating this god-awful, probably one of the most destructive stereotypes of gay men that has ever haunted the earth, that has led to the murder of no doubt millions throughout history of gay men, which is that they're all sexual predators. And, you know, I shouldn't even have to say it's not true, but it's, you know, this is so disgusting. This is beyond homophobic. This is a slur on all gay men. And Marjorie Taylor Greene should be held, you know, somehow accountable for this. It's just like, this is the kind of rhetoric that leads to murder. And a whole bunch of stuff short of murder, you know, discrimination and hate and other problems. But this is, Marjorie Taylor Greene has just gone off the edge. She, well, I'll leave it at that. I'm so horrified by that. I lack any more adjectives. Okay, let me pick up your phone calls. And Nancy in Woodland, California. Hey, Nancy, you live near UC Davis, or Davis, California, rather?
Yeah, Woodland's right next door to Davis. And I just wanted to say it's even better than the article indicated, because they have testing sites in all the cities within our county, which is Yolo County, you know, for all the residents, anybody who, you know, who wants to use the service. And it's as easy as the article says. You know, you just make an appointment. And they do have walk-ins also, but, you know, you go to, it's healthydavistogether.org. And so I just wanted to let you know that it's even better than the article indicated, that it's all over the county. They have testing sites, and it's as easy as it says.
And apparently this is the only place in America where this is going on.
Well, that I knew it was unusual, but I didn't realize it was the only place. But yeah, they've done an excellent job with it. And also, I just wanted to give a shout out to our county public health officer, and I'm sorry, I'm blanking on her name right now, but she's been really great too. And
she's got to be a hero with this.
Yeah. Anyway, I just wanted to throw that in there.
Well, thank you, Nancy. Thanks for the report, and thanks for the corroboration. You know, sometimes you report on things and you just don't. You know, I didn't live there, I didn't know, but thank you. That's very reassuring and great news. And if Davis can do it, hey, maybe Portland can do it. Maybe your town can do it. 27 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls on the other side of this break.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Exposing the con in conservative, 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, right here. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Richard Wolff's Understanding Socialism. This is from the introduction. Socialism is a kind of yearning for a better life than what capitalism permits for most people. Socialist yearnings are as old as capitalism itself because they are its products. Where and when capitalism's problems and failings have accumulated criticism and critics, socialist voices have arisen. And so it is again now. Any serious discussion of socialism must begin by acknowledging socialism's rich diversity. Whatever particular aspect of socialism we choose to analyze, they need to be located within socialism's complexity. That avoids presenting one's own interpretation as if it were the entirety of socialism. In this book, I focus on the economic aspects of socialism, how it differs from capitalism in broad outlines. I'm more interested in socialist critiques of capitalism and their implications about socialist alternatives than in the particulars of the few early experiments in erecting socialist systems, USSR, People's Republic of China, and so on, that history so far offers. Finally, my own education and work constrain me to concentrate on Western Europe and North America. Some important aspects of socialism are thus not covered or discussed here. Yearnings for better lives, such as socialism proposes, are not new. In slave societies, the slaves hoped and dreamed of lives less hard and less out of their own control. Their yearning aimed to obtain freedom. They sought social change that would preclude any one person being the property of another. In feudal societies, the serfs, free in the sense that no one owned them, yearned for better lives too. Their subordination to lords included heavy labor and other burdens that they wanted lifted. They hoped and dreamed of a society in which they would not be bound to the land, the lord of that land, and the feudal dues of labor and subservience. The serfs mobilized in the 1789 French Revolution to demand liberty, equality, and brotherhood. In effect, the serfs had expanded on what the slaves had called freedom. In the American Revolution against British King George III, the revolutionaries were neither slaves nor serfs. They were mostly self-employed farmers, craftspeople, and merchants subject to a foreign feudal kingdom. They wanted liberty as individuals to pursue their dreams without hindrance from feudalism or monarchism, whether foreign or domestic. They added democracy to the goals advanced by the slaves and serfs before them. The different systems of slavery, feudalism, and small-scale self-employment produced masses of people yearning for better lives. Eventually, each of those systems provoked revolutions. Many people then sought to break away from and go beyond those systems. The French and American revolutions marked key moments in the social transformations of major pre-capitalist systems into capitalist ones. By capitalist system, we mean that particular organization of production in which the basic human relation is employer-employee instead of master-slave, lord-serf, or individual self-employment. The revolutionaries who wanted and built capitalism hoped and believed the transition to employer-employee relations of production would bring with them the liberty, equality, brotherhood, and democracy they had yearned for. The revolution's leaders promised to themselves and to the people they led that those goals would be achieved. But the transition to capitalist employer-employee relations that increasingly replaced the previous slave, feudal, and self-employment relations of production had unintended consequences. Capitalism soon proved to be different from what its revolutionaries had hoped. While it enabled some people to be more free and more independent than slaves, serf, or self-employed subjects of monarchies had been, it also seriously limited freedom, independence, and democracy for many. Capitalism betrayed many of the promises made by its advocates. It produced and reproduced great inequalities of income and wealth. Poverty proved to be as endemic as capitalism seemed equally adept at producing and reproducing both wealth and poverty. The capitalist rich used their wealth to shape and control politics and culture. Democratic forms hid very undemocratic content. The cyclical instability attending capitalism constantly threatened and hurt large numbers of people, and so on. Growing numbers of employees within capitalism began to yearn for better lives.
They defined those yearnings first in the familiar terms of the earlier French and American revolutions: equality, fraternity, liberty, and democracy. They criticized a capitalism that failed to deliver those to most people and demanded social changes to achieve them. Many people still continue to want a better, softer, friendlier capitalism, where government regulates and intervenes to achieve more of what the French and American revolutionaries had yearned for and promised. They are also often self-defined as socialists. However, capitalism's development provoked another, different perspective that also called itself socialism. In that view, capitalism had not broken from slavery, feudalism, and monarchy nearly as much as its advocates had imagined. Slavery had masters' slaves, feudalism had lords' serfs, and monarchy had king subjects as their key sources of their inequalities, lack of freedom, oppressions, and conflicts. The employer-employee relation of production and capitalism generated parallel problems. Capitalism installed monarchies inside individual workplaces, even as monarchies outside workplaces were rejected. Kings mostly disappeared, but inside workplaces, the owners or their designated boards of directors assumed king-like powers. The book Understanding Socialism by Richard Wolff.
Share the Thom Hartmann program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann program. 27 Republican senators sent a letter to the Energy Secretary, Jennifer Granholm, echoing talking points that the American Petroleum Institute pushed out on Twitter recently, saying that basically if we're going to stop importing Russian oil into the United States, which, by the way, the Russian oil imports into the U.S. are just a trickle. It's just a tiny drop in the bucket. If we're going to stop doing that, we need to, and these are some quotes from the API Twitter, we need to unleash America's energy. We need to release permits for energy development on federal lands. We need to issue offshore leasing plans for the next 5 years. We need to accelerate energy permitting infrastructure. We need to reduce regulatory and legal uncertainty. Right. It's a scam. And these 27 Republican senators are owned by the big fossil fuel companies because the Supreme Court allowed it with their Citizens United decision. We have to do something about this. There's a whole video rant about it over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Boy, that was a long ad. Welcome back. 35 minutes past the hour. Picking up your phone calls. Dr. Bay in Hartford, North Carolina. Hey, Dr. Bay, what's up?
Good afternoon. How are you?
I am well. I hope you are too.
I am pretty well, but I'm just confused. I keep hearing all this about Ukraine, and this is so terrible. 7 million children are displaced. 28 million children are in jeopardy of dying in Yemen. We hear about how the Democratic Party doesn't respond to all the nonsense that the crazy, quote-unquote, right wing, well, they've always been crazy, and they're not that crazy. They're crazy like foxes. It comes down to the same thing. The doctrine of discovery is still in play. It has always been in play. It has never been taken off the table, and rich white supremacy rules all. I want someone to prove me wrong.
I don't think that's going to happen, Dr. Bay. And I would add that there's another 10 million children in Afghanistan right now that are facing famine. It is a very real and very serious problem. And yes, the United States does not react around the world. From Haiti to Afghanistan, when brown or black people are in crisis, and does react when white people are. That's real. Eric in Erie, Pennsylvania. Hey, Eric, what's on your mind today?
Hey, morning, Tom. I'm just kind of having an allergic reaction to your crazy right-wing alert. And there was something I meant to call in last week, and I think it's about time. It's yet another in my many tools that I see in the toolbox that the Democrats won't reach in and use. We got to deal with the very real threat of long-standing CRT in American politics and law. I'm talking about critical religious theory, where your Lehmeyer guy in Oklahoma wants tribunals for godless commies, where a candidate for a U.S. court has to answer questions like, how religious are you on a 10 scale? Can you judge a Catholic? I'm just so done.
Yeah.
So done with this. And I'm leaving America. The moment my litigation wraps up and I get that check, I'm going. I'm going to Germany where the churches pay taxes. But as long as I'm here and I got to be surrounded by these mouth-breathing goobers, when are the Democrats going to call them out for their theocratic fascist tendencies, which has been there since day one? Yeah. You don't see, any Republican nominees having to answer critical race theory questions, but show me one who has not had to go through the gauntlet, the crucible of critical religious theory to basically litmus test them for office. And if you can't test them out, then you smear them as much as you can
this has been going on since the 50s. I mean, this is why in 1954 they put in God,
go back to Salem, Tom, but realistically, you're right. The fact that these American idiots are calling people commies and socialists, these trucker goons, there's no communism anywhere in the world, and there's never been, and there's never going to be. There's been a couple of autocratic systems that, we'll set up a fake Congress and judiciary, and we'll call it a communist party. There's never been anything close to socialism, and there won't be, because individual humans strive. That's why in Europe they've got great entrepreneurial history. They've got strong capitalist economic systems. And you were talking about, last week, about the actual freedom that people have when they don't have to worry about things like bankruptcy from a medical bill.
Yeah, exactly. No, I'm completely with you, Eric, and your points are well taken. And yes, theocrats want to take over this country. And it was one of the biggest things that the founders and framers were concerned about. And theocracy destroys democracy. It's just that simple. Andre in Chicago. Hey, Andre, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how you feel today?
I'm great.
Good. Thanks for taking the call. I'm okay. Thanks for asking. Hey, Tom, listen, this is what I want to say, man. I don't believe those polls about Biden. I think Biden is doing better than the news media reporting. I think the news media has had a concerted effort to kind of bring him down. And one reason I say that is because of this. Here last week, they've been constantly talking about Joe Biden made a statement and said that Putin shouldn't stay in power, but they're not playing a statement where Lindsey Graham actually said that Putin should be taken out. There's a big difference in saying somebody should be taken out and that they shouldn't stay in power. And I think what Lindsey Graham said was most severe. Fox News is constantly playing the Biden statement, but they're not playing anything about Lindsey Graham.
Excellent point, Andre. Although Lindsey Graham isn't president of the United States, but still, it's an excellent point in terms of our media.
Last thing, Tom, yeah, you're correct on that. Last thing is that we're talking about Ketanji Brown, but guess what? During the hearings, what did we find out? We found out that Ketanji Brown have ruled in 2 cases that favor Republicans. They ruled for the wall that Donald Trump on, and they ruled that they could get Hillary Clinton's emails. But somehow that wasn't good enough for the Republicans to support her.
Yeah. No, she's a good judge and has well, I'll just leave it at that. Andre, thank you for the call. Bill in St. Helens, Oregon. Hey, Bill, what's up?
Yeah, hey, Tom, just a little bit of a lead-in. 1892, United States versus Balin. It was about a quorum vote and a vote of the Congress. But anyway, it said all the constitutional powers each house to determine its rules of proceedings. It may not by its rules ignore constitutional restraints or violate fundamental rights. And in another ruling, which I don't have the case on, it says an unconstitutional action that has been taken before surely does not render that same action any less unconstitutional at a later date. Sure. My whole point of this is Article 1, Section 3, where it gives the vice president the right to cast a deciding vote in the event of a tie. Mm-hmm. My point being, every time the filibuster is challenged, it's always one of the issues is always standing. Well, nobody has greater standing than the vice president of the United States. She's directly impacted by the filibuster. They are voiding her right to cast a deciding vote. And I don't know why that argument is not being made or why she's not going after it.
Well, because establishing her right to cast a deciding vote doesn't mean that you have to change the votes of members to come up with a tie. I mean, I'm missing your logic here, Bill.
My logic is I don't know if it's happened. I tried to find it before I got on the air. If there was even one case where basically the votes were 50-50 going in, everybody agreed to that, but the Congress said, well, the Republicans said, we're going to filibuster.
Right.
They have voided. When does her right to cast and her duty to cast the deciding vote, when does that come into effect?
When there's a 50-50 tie.
Except for there will never be a 50-50
Oh, I see what you're... Now, the penny just dropped for me, Bill. I finally got it. You know, what you're saying is that the Constitution says that in the event of a tie, not in the event of a filibuster, but in the event of a tie, the vice president can cast the deciding vote in the Senate, and therefore the filibuster is preventing... well, wait a minute. No, that doesn't... You know, again, the filibuster... Yeah, because the filibuster is the minority. I need to
say, even if they never did it, the fact that she's the vice president, she has the right, I think she has the standing to challenge the filibuster, because it inherently takes, and by the way, this is the fourth time in the history of this country that we've had a 50-50 divided Senate, and it's probably the first time that it's been so polarized that the votes fall along party lines, 50-50. I was trying to find, but I'm sure at least one time already they have usurped her right to cast a deciding vote by threatening the filibuster. And I think her standing is always there. She can say...
So, in other words, Joe Manchin said that he was going to vote for the John Lewis Voting Rights Enhancement Act and for the Right to Vote Act, which he helped author. He said he was going to vote for them, but he refused to vote to break the filibuster, the Republican filibuster, that would have allowed that 50-50 vote where she could have cast the deciding vote. And so you're arguing that the filibuster therefore deprived her of the constitutional right, I suppose, or responsibility, Article 1, Section 3, to cast that vote. I get it, Bill. I don't think it's probably something that'll get litigated before the Supreme Court any day soon, but I get your logic. John in Columbus, Ohio. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Hey, you mentioned at the outset of the show about Roman Abramovich among victims of some poisoning by Mr. Putin. And I wanted to give you a little backstory on that.
Okay.
Mr. Abramovich is, if we're talking about the same person, he is the owner, or was the owner until a week and a half ago, of the Chelsea Football Club in London.
That's correct.
And has owned them since 2003 or 2004, I believe.
Right.
Over the course of that time, he has loaned the company, I think it's in the billions of dollars, and essentially is responsible for a large part of the club's success.
Mm-hmm.
When the problem in Ukraine did not resolve immediately, the English government sanctioned, meaning punished, the Chelsea Football Club, forcing them to stop selling tickets, players, and merchandise.
Oh, interesting.
And all this because Mr. Abramovich was supposedly a friend of Putin.
Right, a Russian oligarch.
And now is trying to kill him?
Yeah,
it doesn't add up.
Well, yeah, it doesn't. I don't know how to make it add up. John, thank you for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
I think what's going on here, John, in response to your comment, is that they're going after the money and the oligarchs who took the money, whether they still support Putin or not. Alex in Phoenix. Hey, Alex, what's on your mind today?
Oh, good. Thank you for taking my call. And I really do respect your opinion 99% of the time.
But
maybe not 99, but 90% anyway. My problem is with someone in this day and age like Putin. And even though I'm a Ukrainian, I look at it as a citizen of this world, that this man is much too dangerous to the world.
Yeah.
And he's going to be killing people in Ukraine if someone doesn't stop him day after day. It's not a war, it's genocide.
Yeah. I agree.
And this melomaniac,
Look at what he's done to
whatever you
Mariupol.
want to call him. Yeah, exactly, because he wants a land bridge. But that's beside the point.
Yeah, he doesn't care about the people in the city or the city.
No,
he wants the land under
I
it.
don't even think he cares about the Russian people. He lies to them.
Yeah.
And the fact is that he is so dangerous, and we fear him, and a lot of free democracies feel him, especially in Europe. And you got to do something right away.
Yeah.
And I think that the United Nations should gather a referendum of some sort and say, hey, we need 30 countries to say this guy is a criminal.
Mm-hmm.
He's going crazy. Maybe he's not totally crazy, but crazy enough to murder people.
Yeah, the problem with that, Alex, I understand what you're saying and don't disagree with it. The problem is that Russia has a veto on the Security Council, so anything the UN does, Russia can veto. That's the tragic reality. I think we need an independent tribunal like the Nuremberg trials. Kate in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Kate, what's up?
Oh, hi. I was going to clarify why Kamala Harris doesn't have the right to break a filter to do the 50-50 vote.
Thank you.
Until there is a vote, the filibuster, she can break a 50-50 tie once it's been voted.
Right.
But there's a little tiny technical difference between a potential vote and an actual vote.
Actually, it's a huge difference.
Yeah. Well, if they don't take the vote, they don't know whether it's actually 50-50.
Right.
And so the filibuster stops them from actually voting.
Right.
And her right to break it doesn't happen until there's actually been a vote.
Right.
But I agree with the guy. That it's the whole filibuster thing is pretty sleazy, and they should do away with it.
Yeah, it's like a moral wrong, but it's not a technically legal wrong. Are you an attorney, Kate?
If I was an attorney, I'd say it depends.
I love it. Yeah, so, but I think your point is well taken, and it's kind of what I was struggling to wrap my head around with Bill's logic. I get his outrage, but I can't. Right. I don't see a legal way through to the outcome that he's trying to propose, which is that she should simply be able to step up and say, I Claudius. Now, Nixon tried to take on the filibuster in 1959, and I wrote an op-ed about that, I think 2 years ago, that I should probably go back and read because he challenged it, but it didn't end it. I mean, obviously. Kate, thanks a lot for the call. It's great to hear from you. And Nixon was the vice president, by the way, in the late 50s. It's 10 minutes before the hour. Terry Mills is up next. Stick around. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. And welcome back. 10 minutes before the hour, Thom Hartmann here with you. Terry Mills is on the line with us, an Oregon nurse, public health defender, member of Nurses for America. NursesForAmerica.net is the website. Terry's Twitter handle is Nurse Terry, T-E-R-I-A. Nurse Terry A, or Nurses_America, both on Twitter. Terry, welcome back to the program. It's been quite a while since you've dropped in, but tell us what you and Nurses for America are up to right now.
Well, thank you so much, Tom, for having me on this show. I'm sorry that we couldn't Skype. I guess that was a technology fail this morning. But Nurses for America is a grassroots organization of very concerned nurses. And right now, one of our top priorities is getting Congress to understand how critically important it is to renew COVID funding. We are just absolutely flabbergasted, as most of the public health professionals and people in the medical and nursing profession are. It is just unfathomable that Congress would not renew funding because, as you know, we have a new variant, Omicron BA2, that's rapidly spreading. In fact, Shanghai this morning announced that it was shutting down its entire city They're going to test every single individual. Wow. And here we are in the United States, knowing that it's already spread on in the Northeast coast. And we have a pattern, and we know that pattern is it comes from overseas, it comes to the United States, and pretty soon we have a surge.
Right, it goes to big cities. Terry, forgive the interruption, but just for people who don't know what we're talking about, let me set this up. A couple of weeks ago, Congress passed, in order to keep the government opened, a must-pass budget omnibus bill. It just, it funded the whole government, it funded the military, it funded all kinds of stuff. And there was $15 billion in there to continue things like free COVID testing, free vaccines, masks, the anti-COVID drugs, these new, oral pharmaceuticals, the drug that remdesivir, I think it's called, that's taken by infusion. It funded all those things, and the Republicans demanded that it be removed from that budget bill. And the Democrats acceded to that. They said, okay, we'll take it out because, the budget bill had to pass. It was a must-pass bill. And so now, and I'm of the opinion that the Republicans demanded that it be taken out because they want the pandemic to come back. They want it to be bad. They're licking their chops at the thought that Omicron is going to devastate America because it'll reflect poorly on Joe Biden. You don't have to comment on the politics of that, but that's where we're at right now, is, sometime in the next couple of weeks or the next couple of months, depending on where you are in the country, there's not going to be any more free COVID tests. There's not going to be any more free shots. There's not going to be any more anything. And a lot of states are losing funding to track this stuff. Correct me if I've misstated anything here, Terry.
No, I think what they were asking, the only thing that I can think of offhand is I think at that time they were asking for $22.5 billion, but we know really to scale up a full, robust response, we probably need closer to $100 billion. And, who is this going to most affect? It's the patients that we care about the most. It's our underserved community. It's the uninsured. It's the BIPOC community. And many of us, like myself, have been volunteering since the beginning of the pandemic because we want to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to get vaccinated, to obtain testing, which is so important to keeping our schools open. Our poor school nurses, they must just be flabbergasted, like I said right now, and dismayed because we don't want to close our schools. And Tom, a COVID test costs about $125. And what family who's struggling right now with inflation, trying to put food on their table, trying to transport themselves at the expense of gas to and from work, who is going to be able to pay for that test?
Right. Quest Diagnostics has just come out and said they're going to start charging people $125. It's $119 for the test and a $6 physician fee. And one thing that you didn't mention that's also a big concern is the NIH also receives funding for testing for new variants. And so we need that. We need to be able to know when we're getting a new variant, but even more important, we need to come up with a way to develop a new vaccine if that's needed. Otherwise, you can see that even though we're still climbing up the mountain to reach the cliff, we're going to fall right off the cliff. Right.
And I'm worried not just for the health of our people, our country, but also for our economy at the same time.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, this is going to hit at the worst possible time. Terry, any update on the second booster from Merck and Moderna? Pfizer
no,
and Moderna, rather?
All I know is that Pfizer and Moderna have both asked the FDA for a second booster, which would be like the fourth vaccine. Right. However, I want to tell your listeners, this is also something that really concerns me as a nurse.
We just have 10 seconds.
Only 30% of the adult population has received their boost, their third shot. And we need to get that 70% in as soon as possible.
Yeah, especially while there's still money to pay for it. Terry Mills, nursesforamerica.net is the website. Nurse Terry, T-E-R-I-A on Twitter, or nurses_America. Terry, thanks so much for dropping by. It's always great talking to you.
Thank you, Tom. Have a good day.
Thank you. You too. We'll be right back. Judd Legum is going to drop by.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, How the Death of Privacy and the Rise of Surveillance Threaten Us and Our Democracy by Thom Hartmann. More information at all book outlets. Wild Alaskan Company, 100% sustainable wild-caught seafood delivered right to your door. More info at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. Cozy Earth, better sleep, better you. More info at CozyEarth.com, promo code TOM. The latest views and opinions from U.S. politics and other fascinating subjects too, including cutting-edge science reports at HartmannReport.com. And Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at Dinovite.com.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Health Justice Now, Single Payer and What Comes Next by Timothy Faust. And this is from the introduction. A secret scream rings through America. It rings down the sterile fluorescent hallways of our hospitals. It rings over our rural towns and our native reservations. It rings through our prisons, the bellies of our great cities. It rings in our farms, in our fields, our streets, and our sewers, our bodies, and our blood. And we are cursed to never hear it clearly until, at last, we realize it has been our own mouth screaming and we are lost. A child born today inherits, in that secret, a new American squalor, the skeletal remains of the American cities, the bleached bones of the American suburbs. This secret is a birthright of continual exploitation, pumped for labor and drained of cash and then punished for the resulting suffering. Punished for being hungry, punished for being sick, punished for being pregnant, punished for being poor, punished for being black or brown, punished for being queer, for being unlucky, for being. At the base of that suffering is lodged a little truth, like a knot in the stomach. In America, sickness makes you poor, and poorness makes you sick. This is a book about that relationship and why it happens, and why it's unnecessary, and what we can do to fix it. The cosmic whirling of God's great slot machine has not determined that some people are fated to suffer while others flourish. We have the resources to take care of everyone, and yet we refuse to do so. Your medical debt and medical bills are unnecessary, but we have chosen to make them necessary. These are structural problems with structural causes, and many of them share roots in how we pay for health care. This is a book about health care and health finance. They are different. Healthcare is anything that helps you stay safe and healthy. It's a kind of freedom from and within your own body. Health finance is the method by which we as a country pay for that freedom and by which we decide who gets to have it and who doesn't. Healthcare is more than what happens to you in the hospital. Healthcare is whether your home makes you sick, or your food makes you sick, or your environment makes you sick, or whether you have enough money to afford the things that keep you healthy. In America, the structure of corporate health care has convinced us that some people deserve health care and some people don't. This is a book about that corporate health finance, about private insurance and private insurers. For half a century, they've convinced us that they're the only things that keep us or could ever keep us from the utter financial ruination of illness. They've sold us different inadequate insurance plans and persuaded us that this is a form of great liberty, while chipping away at our freedoms for profit and holding our bodies and our children's bodies hostage. This is a book about single-payer health care, a health finance model in which we pool our abundant collective resources to provide health care to all people. It is a common model across the world. As we will discuss in this book, we have the potential not just to enact a single-payer program in America, but to build the greatest health care program among any so-called developed democracy. Here is my profession of faith. I believe beyond any doubt that single-payer is demonstrably sound and imminently feasible. I believe a properly ambitious and well-structured single-payer program will do more than any other American social program of this generation to soothe the burns, to resuscitate the spirit, to nourish the moral will of the American people. I believe it will loosen the loathsome manacles of American health finance, an exploitative institution that profits by plundering from us our own bodily autonomy, and that anchors a larger exploitation that holds those whom we love as captive leverage to guarantee our servitude to abusive employers or domestic partners, to those who seek to dominate us both in the office and in the hospital. I believe this nation owes its people, whose labor has created its rich banquet, the safety and agency of health care. I believe this health care is greater in scope than that which happens upon an operating table. I believe that housing, food, income, and more, the components of basic human dignity, are health care. And I believe our work is that of striving toward justice for all people. And I therefore believe, I have to believe, that single-payer health care is our moral imperative. Single-payer is our tool. Single-payer is our weapon. Single-payer is our first step. But single-payer on its own is not the goal. This book is about health justice. Healthcare is personal, so I want to start this book personally by introducing two friends of mine, Steve Way and Kyle Kolick. They're two guys about my age, I'm 30, who live in North New Jersey. They're sweet, gentle people, and probably the most charismatic pair of friends I've met in my entire life. They make me laugh until my face hurts, and we like watching pro wrestling together. They're also being utterly broken by our American healthcare system, and it's keeping them from living their lives. Steve has muscular dystrophy. The muscle and tissues that hold his body together are eating themselves. He's doing pretty good, all things considered. He beat his original life expectancy of 18 and now probably has a long life ahead of him. Steve needs a wheelchair to move and a ventilator to help him breathe. The book, Health Justice Now, Timothy Faust.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the third hour of our program. 6 corporations funding the attack on women's reproductive rights. Judd Legum over at popular.info has just a barn burner of a piece here with, well, I'll let him tell us who his co-authors were on this, because Judd is on the line with us. Popular.info is the website. He is a journalist and founder of popular.info. You can also follow him on Twitter at Judd Legum, Juddlegum. Judd, welcome back to the program. Tell us, A, about the people who helped collaborate with you on this article. I know you're building, quite a news facility there at popular.info, and how these contributions tie into this Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization case that is before the court right now.
Yeah, well, we're getting started building a organization over here. I've got 2 researchers who helped me with a lot of these pieces, Tessnam and Rebecca, and they helped me with this piece on looking at a lot of the bills that are underway to restrict reproductive rights. And what's motivating a lot of this is the anticipation that probably by the end of June, we don't know the exact date, but expected by the end of June, the Supreme Court will rule on Dobbs v. Jackson's Women's Health and likely either erode or possibly reverse Roe v. Wade. Right. And so what we're seeing now, you see this every year, but it's more intense, but it's also taken on a new importance, because what you're seeing now is states implementing or proposing, and some of them passing. In Idaho, they just signed a bill into law that is cutting off access to abortion after 6 weeks, right. Which is, before many women even know that they're pregnant. You have other states who are looking at 15 weeks. This is all sort of part of a game where they're trying to kind of guess where the Supreme Court.
Yeah, if I could just jump in here real quick. This is from your newsletter today. In Tennessee, State Representative Alexander has introduced a bill that would outright ban all abortions. And does not allow abortions even during the first 6 weeks of pregnancy. No exceptions for rape, no exceptions for incest. And when she was asked if family members of a rapist could sue the woman who gets the abortion, she basically said yes. In Oklahoma, lawmakers have introduced 3 different abortion bills. In Florida, state lawmakers have passed a bill banning abortions after 15 weeks. West Virginia and Arizona both moving legislation like that through their legislatures, which brings us to the corporations that are supporting these particular legislators who are pushing these particular laws.
Yeah, what we did is we went down the line. We looked at 6 states where these bills are really aggressive and moving, either have been signed already or are, past one house, past one chamber. And, we found that there's a number of very prominent corporations, including corporations that are in healthcare, who are supporting not just people who vote for these bills, but we only looked at the sponsors of these bills. So we found that, for example, CVS Health, which talks about their commitment to women's health care, et cetera, donated $27,600. We just looked through 2020, so we're really only looking at 2020 and 2021, to co-sponsors of these abortion bans in 5 of the states that we looked at: Arizona, Tennessee, Oklahoma, Idaho, and Florida. So although these bills are getting more and more extreme, and although the consequences could be very tangible for all the women in these states, millions of women, you still have very prominent corporations who are backing the politicians who are behind these measures.
Yeah. And your list of companies: CVS, which is in the health space; AT&T, donating to abortion bans, or legislators who are writing abortion bans, not just voting for them, writing them, in Florida, Arizona, Tennessee, Oklahoma, and Idaho. Merck, which is making one of the anti-COVID drugs now. Merck donating to lawmakers behind abortion bans in Florida, Tennessee, and West Virginia. Comcast donating to lawmakers behind the Florida abortion ban. United Health, the health insurance giant, donating to lawmakers behind the abortion bans in Idaho, Arizona, and Oklahoma. And Anheuser-Busch donating to the lawmakers who passed this abortion ban wrote this abortion ban in Idaho. Judd, are any of these companies responding to your outing them?
No, we haven't. We didn't. We reached out to all the companies that you just mentioned, and none of them got back to us. I think we find usually that's the case when they don't plan on doing anything or they don't have an explanation. Usually if a company is not planning on donating to these folks in the future, they'll come out and let us know. But if they don't really have anything to say, they generally think it's best not to respond. So that's what we got. We didn't get any response. And it'll be interesting to see if this kind of posture, which is a public relations posture, can really hold. Because right now, these bills either have just been signed or they're still in the process. Supreme Court hasn't been ruled. But, it's almost April. June is rapidly approaching, and people are going to wake up to the fact that it's very likely in just a couple of months it's going to be a dramatically different environment in the United States with respect to reproductive rights. And whereas before you had a floor that was established through this constitutional right that's existed since the 1970s is going to be gone, and it's going to be a state-by-state continual battle to preserve these rights.
Right. And in fact, here in Oregon, I don't know if they acted on it. I frankly I haven't seen a follow-up, but the legislature and the governor were talking about appropriating millions of dollars to support the infrastructure of abortion clinics here in the state, because Idaho, the state next door to us, is, if their legislation is approved by the Supreme Court, is going to cut off abortions, and we're expecting a flood of people from Idaho, which is, most of our eastern border.
And that's what some of these companies actually are doing, companies that are more supportive of abortion rights and want to make sure that their employees can get access to this kind of care. They're saying, oh, well, we'll pay for you to travel, to fly to another state, which is fine, except for the fact that pretty soon there's not going to be that many states where this is even a possibility. It also really underscores what really happens to the nature of abortion access when you have these kinds of laws, because it just becomes, yes, if you have a good job or you have your own money and you have a good employer, you have your own resources, you'll still be able to continue to get whatever kind of care that you want. If you can't travel hundreds of miles, if you can't take several days off of work, if you don't have that support, it's not going to be available to you. Yeah. And that's really what the sort of new reality is going to be.
Yeah, there's a wind blowing, as they say. And which raises, the much larger question, why do we allow corporations to buy politicians in the first place? But that's beyond the scope of this whole conversation, I suppose. But Judd Leggum, popular.info. Hey, Judd, thank you so much for dropping by.
Thanks a lot, Tom.
Great talking with you. Also, you can follow him on Twitter at Judd Leggum.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
15 minutes past the hour, back with your calls and more of the news of the day right after this. Stick around. Amazing. There's just some amazing stories out here. At the moment, we have open lines, as they say in the radio business, FYI. So let me share a story here with you. Legislation that would make it illegal to film police officers is closer to becoming law. This is troubling, shall we say. This is a Republican-backed measure to restrict the filming of police officers. This in the state of Arizona, specifically. Timothy Sparling, a lawyer and legislative advocate for Arizona Attorneys for Criminal Justice, testified about this, House Bill number 2319. And it says that you may not film this is, the we don't want any more George Floyd kind of stories, right? You may not film a police officer without the officer's permission. And they put they have to define a distance. I mean, if you were a block away, could you do that? So the distance they defined was 8 feet. But all that means is that if you're filming a police officer from 15 feet, all the officer has to do is walk within 8 feet of you, and suddenly you have to have that person's permission. Sparling said, when officers have such wide discretion to determine, say, what is lawful conduct, what is unlawful conduct, on what grounds, and that it's not properly defined, it's ultimately up to whatever the officer wants it to be. The 8-foot buffer zone doesn't account for movement from the officers toward the person filming, leaving them to be found in violation. This is a minimum 30 days in jail. If a cop says, don't film me, you go to jail for 30 days if you filmed them. John Kavanaugh sponsored the bill. He was previously a cop in New York and New Jersey. And this is grim stuff coming out of Arizona. Expect to see more of this. The other amazing story is Madison Cawthorn. You can't make this stuff up. Madison Cawthorn once bragged about his Jesse Helms lunchbox. I mean, this guy has been a Republican since he was a kid. He does not hang out with Democrats. And he is now saying, he's a pathological liar. He lied about getting accepted into the United States Naval Academy. He lied about his own friend's responses to a car accident that left him paralyzed from the waist down. He's lied about training for the Paralympics. He's lied about running a racist website. You know, he's lied about a whole lot of things. But now Madison Cawthorn is coming out and trying to imply, I guess, that he's talking about Democrats. But everybody in Congress knows that Madison Cawthorn doesn't even talk to Democrats. And he says that his friends in Congress are inviting him to orgies, to sex parties. I mean, this is amazing. He said, he goes, he says, I mean the sexual perversion. Aside from that, I mean the sexual perversion that goes on. And he says, I mean it. I'm being kind of a young guy in Washington where the average age is 60 or 70, and I look at all these people, a lot of them that I know, I've looked up to throughout my life. I've always paid attention to. Well, that would be Republicans. And he says, then all of a sudden you get invited to like, well, hey, we're going to have some kind of a sexual get-together at one of our homes. You should come. And I'm like, what did you ask me? And then you realize they're asking you to come to an orgy. And then he goes on to talk about, you watch one of them doing, a key bump of cocaine right in front of you. And it's like, this is wild. Is he talking about Don Jr.? I mean, who's he talking about? Which Republicans are doing key bumps of cocaine and inviting people over to their houses for orgies? Inquiring minds want to know. We'll be right back. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Clay, then I'm going to pick up your phone calls. Madison Cawthorn, the right-wing member of the House of Representatives from North Carolina, who has a history as being a serial liar. He lied about getting into the Naval Academy. He lied about his friend's responses to a car accident that he had. He lied about training for the Paralympics. He's lied about running a racist website, et cetera. Well, now I don't know if he's lying about this one or not. Given, Don Jr. being all cranked up, anyhow, what he said is that he didn't say Republicans. He said guys I look up to, guys I've followed my whole life. Here's the exact quote. He says, and I look at all these people, a lot of them that I've looked up to throughout my life. I've always paid attention to politics guys. And then he goes on to say, then all of a sudden you get invited to quote, hey, we're going to have some kind of a sexual get-together at one of our homes. You should come, end quote. And Cawthorn says, well, what did you just ask me to? And then you realize they're asking you to come to an orgy. Or the fact that, there's some of the people that are leading on the movement. Leading on the movement? I don't think he's talking about Donald Trump here, but anyhow, then people that are leading on the movement to try and remove addiction in our country, and then you watch them doing, a key bump of cocaine right in front of you, and this is wild. Right. And I'm sure he thought that people listening to him would think that he was talking about Democrats in the House. But anybody with half a brain or knows anything about Madison Cawthorn knows that, no, he's not talking about Democrats. Anyhow, let's pick up your phone calls. David, in Keene, New Hampshire. Hey, David, what's up?
Hi. I was going to ask about the ongoing prosecutions of Donald Trump. There's one in New York City where a fellow resigned because it seems that the leader of the prosecution, a man named Bragg, wouldn't allow the prosecutions or something along those lines.
Here's
So
what
I'm
happened,
wondering
David.
If this guy,
Cyrus Vance Jr. was the prosecutor, the district attorney in Manhattan up until recently. There was an election, the election that put well, in any case, they put Alvin Bragg in power, and when that election happened, Alvin Bragg took over the DA's office, and once he came in, he basically, the only news we got initially was that two of the prosecutors who had come in specifically to look at Donald Trump quit. Now we've seen, just in the last week, we've seen the resignation letter of at least one of them. And basically what they're saying is that we could have prosecuted Trump. We had the goods on Trump. We could have put his ass in jail. But Alvin Bragg decided, no, he doesn't want to do it. Now, they didn't say why he doesn't want to do it. I don't know why he doesn't want to do it. I don't know if he's afraid of the political heat, or that he's been bought off, or he's somebody else is going to do it. I don't know. But what's happening right now in New York is a lot of people are pressuring Kathy Hochul, who is the governor, who replaced, what's his name when he left. They're pressuring Kathy Hochul to hand this over to Letitia James, who is the state attorney general, who is prosecuting him or investigating him right now for civil offenses of tax fraud and bank fraud. But this would be a criminal offense. So that's what's going on, David. Did I answer your question?
Yes. I was just curious if that Mr. Alvin Bragg is he like paid by Trump, or is
God
he
only knows. I have no idea. I know very little about the guy. I don't live in New York, and he's keeping a closed lips on this thing. David, thank you. Bill in New Tripoli, Pennsylvania. Hey, Bill, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Hey, I was just, reading through Article 3, Section 1 of the Constitution, and having to do with how long Supreme Court justices can remain in office.
Right.
And
it says during good behavior.
In good behavior, that's the key term here. So, I'm wondering, what do we recognize as good behavior? I mean, I can think of Justice Thomas and his wife's activities, and